You are listening to You and the Truth, where we will give you the truth face to face. Now, what you do with it is up to you.
Hi, and welcome to today's podcast, Cardiac Arrest, the Near Death of an NFL Player, and the Do's and Don'ts. I'm Ralph, sometimes known as Elpin, and I'll be your host today. But before we begin, please make sure you hit the subscribe and like buttons on the bottom of your screen and share this with everyone you know, because what you'll hear and see could possibly save someone's life. Now, as you may or may not know, depending on whether you watch professional football, a few weeks ago, a 24-year-old professional football player by the name of Damar Hamlin suffered cardiac arrest in the middle of a football game. This event was witnessed by millions on live television and thousands who attended the game. Everyone was in shock as medics tended to this young man whose body lay sprawled on the football field with his life on the line. Within minutes, those announcing the game on ESPN and other news outlets immediately took to prayer, something unheard of in today's day and age. A public display asking God to intervene and save this young man's life. Well, now that the smoke is cleared, questions are being asked. Why did this happen? How could this possibly happen, especially to a 24-year-old professional athlete in the prime of his career? Those are just two questions with many more to come, I'm sure. But regardless, one thing is for certain. Had there not been someone around with knowledge of what to do, what not to do, and trained to take action, Damar Hamlin would most likely not be with us today. Thank God he is, as he's recovering and doing well. But the real question that we should each be asking ourselves is this. If this were to happen to a loved one, or even a stranger in my presence, how would I react? What should I do? What should I not do? Now, most of us with no medical training would be hard-pressed to react in a way that could save that person's life, because every second counts. These are some of the questions we'll try to answer today, and to do that, let me bring in two of my co-hosts and very good friends, Kyle Goodnight and Jason Rodriguez, both paramedics who have faced situations such as this on many occasions. Gentlemen, thanks for joining me. It's always a pleasure to have you guys on. It's always good to see you guys. Listen, Kyle, let's start with you. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your background, your experience in the medical field?
Sure. Well, I'm a full-time paramedic. I'm actually on the truck on a shift basis. I do have a strong history in the medical field as well. Before becoming a paramedic, I was a respiratory therapist and actually worked in level 1 trauma centers and ERs and ICUs. So any of those things that that came up during that week after what Ralph for information about in the intro, I've got history on both sides of the fence on that. So I can talk about questions you may have about things that you heard in the media about different things like that. So, but yeah, that's a little bit of me.
Cool.
Jason?
Yeah, Jason.
So basically, I was a firefighter paramedic for about 17 years, just recently retired.
Lucky duck.
Yeah, well, it was from a line of duty
12
injury.
more.
Yeah,
so I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah, it took me out early. And at the time, I was in medical school, pursuing a PhD program, and it kind of put everything on hold. So I have a master's in public health and epidemiology, and my bachelor's was in business. So I brought it back to the medical field, and then was able to get into medical school. I was almost done, and then I got hurt. So that kind of changed everything. So I'm hoping to get started back with that medical school soon. But
cool.
Yeah.
Excellent, man. Excellent. It's okay. So listen, guys. I feel I'm the total dummy here. So I want you to speak to me as if I was a child, and the people that are listening, most people that are listening to this would have no idea what you guys do, no idea what happened that day. There's just no way to do that. So Kyle, let's start with you. Could you just walk us through, because you saw this event live. See, Jason and I
saw
didn't
it in
see it
real
live.
time.
Okay.
Yeah.
So talk us through that.
Sure. Yeah. We were watching the football game and over at a buddy's house, and and I've watched a lot of football in my time. I played football, and I've been a paramedic on the sidelines of football games, mainly high school, and a little bit of college, local colleges here locally. But when it happened, if nobody sees it, we'll run a real quick video of it real quick here.
% of the time. So you're essentially a weak side linebacker in the run game as well.
Here's Higgins wide open to midfield and lower.
As you just got back from seeing the video, he got hit like a standard tackle and then stood up from the tackle, kind of stumbled a little bit, and you thought, okay, well, maybe he hit his head in that tackle, and then just fell backwards like a tree falling, just boom, just like all of a sudden, just bam. And so you're like, oh man, I wonder what's going on. And you're thinking concussion, because that's really a big stuff in the news right now with everything happening with the Dolphins quarterback and all that, and just in concussions in general in the NFL. So that's what you're thinking right off the bat. And then when you get out there and there's people around them and they're not moving, then you're thinking, okay, maybe some spinal cord injury. But then all of a sudden, when the first trainer looked up, I went, holy S. I think they're getting ready to start CPR on this guy. And my friend was like, what are you talking about? CPR in a football? Like, no, he just got knocked out. And I'm like, no, and then they cut away. They took us away from the view so we couldn't see all the stuff. But the mayhem that was happening around that player, I've seen 100 times, maybe more, not only in the ER setting, in the ICU setting, but on the street, in someone's house. I've seen that look of it's down to business time here. This isn't just your run of the mill injury. This is some sort of major life threatening event. People on radios, just that look in the eye of those trainers and the hustle and bustle. I just had that feeling that they were going to start CPR. And then after they cut away, they went commercial, and then like maybe 5 or 6 minutes later, 9 minutes later, they came back. And one of the first things they said was, CPR has been performed, for about the last 9 minutes, they've been doing CPR on Damar Hamlin. And I looked at my buddy, I'm like, I told you. And he was like, how did you know that? I'm like, it's just like, right, Jason? I mean, Explain it. I mean, can you explain it any better than me? I mean, it's the feeling when you just seeing it.
Yeah, you can tell it. You can feel it.
Compressions.
I didn't see it either, but watching that injury, the way it went down, it looked like a nothing tackle. It wasn't a big deal. He did have his arms stretched outwards, and the guy kind of contacted him with his shoulder, and then he rolled over and landed on top of him. So it was almost like two collisions with the chest. And then, like you said, he stood up, kind of like teetered, and then went down immediately. And like you were saying, like when we're on those calls, when we're in those situations, you can just look at each other and you kind of know what you're thinking. Your partner will reach for the next thing that you were thinking you were going to grab because he's thinking the same thing. We're all trained similar. And most people would be frozen or working so hard to try and get something done that nothing actually gets done. We've got that saying, slow is fast. You take your time, you do it, and you go to the next step.
Slow is fast. Yep. Yep. But yeah, it was just a look from what was happening there, and it was pretty surreal. That whole, the next hour was just glued to the TV, trying to get any information. And as we'll talk about later, then we started seeing some amazing things happen that never happens on national TV, especially live broadcasts, and that's live prayer and live faith being broadcast out to the world on this this type of network. And like I said, we'll touch base on that on one of our talking points a little bit later. But it was a pretty surreal night, So
yeah.
Oh, I can hear you, Ralph. You're out.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Now we're back.
My apologies. I'd like to mute myself because I don't want to interrupt what you guys are saying.
No,
I'm
you're
trying
fine.
to listen to every word you say. It's so fascinating.
Yeah.
How is someone? How can you identify? Because if I see something like that happen in a football game, I've never seen anything. So to me, it's like cardiac arrest. So the typical.
Yeah.
How
did
you know? How did you know?
Well, just kind of back up a little bit too. I've seen 2 other cardiac arrest incidences on the television in a sporting event.
Wow.
And one was a hockey player that came off the ice and had, hindsight 2020, he had some sort of known, cardiac history. And he went down on the bench and in between the wall and the bench. And they had to start working him in between that space. And then they lifted him up and took him to the back hallway. I was watching that event live as well. And then there was another hockey player, and we're going to touch base on this about one of the more popular thought process of what happened to DeMar Hamlin actually happened to a hockey player from the St. Louis Blues. And it did the same thing. Something hit him into the chest. It made his heart skip a beat, if you will, for lack of medical terms that we're going to get into a little bit later. And he went down, and they started CPR on him, and he survived. So, this is one of those things where, once again, even though I wasn't on scene, I saw the looks in the faces. It's a different look than us, like Jason and I, who were trained to know what to look for in those situations. We go off the cues of family members. It's different when a family member has someone who's breathing in their house and they want your help. It's a way different feeling and a different look and a different urgency than they come out and they meet you at the front porch and they're saying, you need to get in there, and there's no pulse. It's a totally different feel. Like I said, I've seen it 100 times or more. I mean, I've been in the medical field for 25 years. I've been around a lot of cardiac arrest. So, but yeah. So,
Jason, let me go to you. So, if you were to look at this young man the second it had happened, I would imagine when it happened, I didn't see it live. The entire training staff came out.
Yeah.
Let's say you're part of that training staff. You guys, he's lying there. You kneel. What is it? What is the first sign that says to you cardiac arrest?
Well, before even thinking that it was cardiac arrest, even if I was assuming that as I was getting there, your primary thing that you're looking at is cervical spine injury. So you're going to run up and hold C-spine. Whoever the first person is there will hold C-spine. And then you're going to look at...
What is C-spine?
Oh, I'm sorry. You're going to immobilize
basically hold their head in place. Yeah. And that person's right there. Like if my mic is their head, I'm behind them. And once you get to C-spine, then now you can look and see if there's chest rise. You can see if they're conscious level,
So that's standard operating procedure.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And it's much easier with a big football helmet. You can put your legs on either side. Now you can check a pulse. You can look for breathing.
Yeah.
You can, you don't want to startle the person if they're, maybe they just are out of it, and then you come up and you startle and now they jump up. But you do have to kind of, wake them a little, see if you can get them to wake up while you're checking for a pulse and for breathing. And that once you are able to establish that there's no pulse, you're not even looking for breathing at that point.
Right.
It's CPR time.
Yeah. So right away,
another thing too,
it's a cardiac issue, right?
And the one thing Jason and I will both agree with is that we kind of go into situations thinking the worst case scenario. Yeah. Oh my gosh, I've got to do CPR on this patient. And then sometimes it peels back really quick because they're talking to you. Like, okay, I'm not going to do it. Like we go into we try to approach every emergency situation, no matter what the dispatch says or no matter what someone tells us. When we get to that patient, we approach it in our brain and our decision-making tree. And we both have the same concept in our brain because we were all trained nationally and took the same exact national test to train us the same way, basically, is the fact that we go in expecting the worst case scenario. A lot of the times it's not the worst case scenario. We peel back our intensity, and then we start talking to the patient if they're alive, if they're conscious. But when it comes to getting to that patient, and here's DeMar, I can only imagine what they saw was he was unresponsive. He could have been breathing. There's that sometimes not breathing doesn't always stop when the heart stops. But there could have been no breathing. And then as soon as they see that and there's no response, one of the first things you do when someone's not responding to you at all, even if it is a concussion, you're still checking a pulse. Yeah. Because that's the next thing you want to know. Does this guy have a heartbeat? He's not unconscious. If he was just, his, arm hurt, or if he was conscious and his neck hurt, he would be able to look at me and blink. But if he's not doing any of that, I got to go right for checking a pulse. And you check it, here, or you check it here, and if they don't have that, well, you've got, you start it. You just no pulse, guys. I'm starting CPR. I mean, Jason and I both have called that out in our past easily. Guys, I have no pulse. even on people that had a pulse when they got to the back of my truck. I have no pulse right now. Let's go. And it's on.
Kyle, have you done CPR through shoulder pads? Can you imagine?
No, I've never done
different
CPR through
ballgame.
shoulder pads. The good news is that, Jason will test to this too. We train yearly on how to take shoulder pads and helmets off. That's something that's just built into our standard yearly training. Like we'll have it again at basically the end of summer, beginning of fall. We'll have a real quick refresher on how to take off a helmet, how to take off shoulder pads. And the good thing about shoulder pads is literally you cut the middle strings and you cut the two straps underneath the arms with scissors, and it just peels back like an onion, and they're gone.
Yeah.
Helmet could be a little bit different, but a good thing is most of the new helmets have the press button release.
Yeah.
You press the button from it's not a screwdriver anymore to take off the little holders on the face mask. It's a press button release, and you can and then the helmet just comes nice and easy.
I imagine that when they first got onto them and they started compressions, for at least a minute, maybe 30 seconds, they were doing it right to the shoulder pads.
Yeah, they were. And I think that'd be okay. I mean, you're just compressing down, something on top of them like a big coat, I've done compressions on somebody before I've exposed them just through a big coat or a big shirt or something. So, same concept, just as long as you get down those 2 inches,
Jason, for us that are totally ignorant when it comes to this, because I wouldn't know, I couldn't begin to know how to identify someone like that. Tell us what cardiac arrest is, what causes it, and then we can get into what to do and what not to do.
So
tell us what causes cardiac arrest. What is that?
Think of your heart as the hardest working muscle in your body. It never gets to take a break, because if it did, it's cardiac arrest. So cardiac arrest is when your heart totally stops. There's no electrical activity, or sometimes you'll have some electrical activity, but there's no output from the heart. So it's a total stop in cardiac output, and there's no blood pressure. If you have no blood pressure, there's no blood going up to the brain to keep you conscious. Once you lose consciousness, eventually you'll stop breathing, and it's that quick path towards death. There's different things that can cause cardiac arrest. There's blood clots to the coronary arteries. You can have like in this case, what's supposed is that it's an electrical disruption. So there's something called the sinoatrial node, which is the beginning of the electrical system of the heart. From there, you have the AV node and a Bachmann's bundle, and these things are just different electrical centers. Basically, the SA node initiates it. It fires across to the other side. So it starts on the right side of the heart, goes over to the left side of the heart, and stops at the AV node, where it kind of takes a break. When that fires, when that first node fires, that triggers both of your help me, Kyle. Atriums. I'm sorry. First,
I didn't know where you're going.
I got stuck.
Yeah.
It triggers first your right and left atriums to fire. Then it pauses in the AV node, which is the other electrical node, and it waits a second to allow those both atriums to fully empty and the ventricles to fully load, and then the AV node sends that signal down through the rest of the Purkinje fibers, what they're called, and that allows now the ventricles to fire, and that's what pushes the blood out through the aorta, up to your brain, and down to the rest of your body. And if you don't have that process going, you're not getting any oxygen, you're not getting any nutrients, and it's the beginning of cell death. And there's multiple things that can lead to that. Go ahead.
How long can that process, let's say it stops, how long can that process stop functioning before someone actually dies?
So, and I've got a chart later on I'm going to talk about, and we can throw it up now. But basically, when it comes to the slippery slope of death of cardiac arrest, about 10% survivability goes down every minute without CPR. So by the time, if you think about how long it takes for someone to call, different than Damar Hamlin. Damar Hamlin, they were right on him. They had no CPR within the first minute of discovering he had no pulse. But just a run-of-the-mill person who has a cardiac arrest, if it's just in, you got to think 75, 80% of cardiac arrest happen at home. that they don't happen on a football field. They don't happen in public. A lot of more than not, they happen at home. So this is a very good time to, if you don't know CPR, we're going to give you some tools for that a little bit later. But basically what happens is for every minute you go by, you decrease your from 100% survivability, you go down 10% for every minute that you're not doing CPR. So if someone calls 911 and CPR is not happening and they take a minute to describe what's going on, now they're down to 90% survivability rate. Then if it takes, let's say it takes someone, the dispatcher realize we've got a cardiac arrest here. Okay, I need you to start CPR. Put your hands on their chest and start pushing. For some reason, sometimes people still, funny as it seems, people refuse that. Even loved ones. I don't know how to do that. I'm not doing it. I'm going to hurt them. So our dispatch is now, basically telling people to do this, not asking anymore, and trying to get, and that increases the number of people or the bystanders to do CPR that may not know it. But you got to think, then they call us, the tones go off. We jump in our truck. It takes us, 30, 60 seconds to get into the truck and get rolling towards the scene. Then we have an average, national average is what we'd like to have, at least in a rural area or in an area like I'm at. We'd like to be on scene within 4 minutes. So let's just say it's 4 minutes, sometimes longer, sometimes shorter, of course, it's average. So now we are 6 minutes into this cardiac arrest. What's our percentage at now? If some compressions don't start, now we're at, we're 6 minutes in, that's 10%. We're down to 40% survivability rate, right? So then we get out of our truck. We got to get our equipment. We got to get in the house. That's about another minute or so. We start CPR as soon as we get to the patient and see that there's no pulse happening. So now we're 7 to 8 minutes into this situation that hopefully was witnessed, right? Let alone if it wasn't. Now we start compressions. Now we're down to that about 20% survivability rate if everything goes right at that point. And that's why we train yearly on CPR. Sometimes more than once a year, we train on CPR and how to rotate and get people to not have pauses, to compress breaths, to get our equipment on, to get things on so we can read what kind of rhythm that they're in, so we can shock a shockable rhythm if it comes about, and once we get to them and are doing life-saving measures. But the biggest statistic is this next slide you'll see here. You can see here on this one where the red line goes. The red line is when CPR is started early. And you can see how the curve happens. Instead of it being a sharp curve down of death, it is now flattened out. And now our survivability rate with early CPR and everything in place with everything that we do once we get to the patient, we've got over 50% survivability rate if you can just do CPR on scene. As soon as you see it happen, or as soon as you realize they're unresponsive, unconscious, starts CPR. That's what the lay person needs to know. And we're going to send you, at the end of this, we're going to talk about a website that you can go to, and we're going to put in the link below that will actually teach you within a few pages of a web page how to do CPR and do effectively, because it's a really good website, let alone being able to take a class locally.
Wow, very interesting. Jason, let me go to you for a second here. There are different types of cardiac arrest from what I understand. Now, let me just preface this by saying this. I'm going to give you an example, and I want you to see how you can answer this. As you know, I'm a open heart surgery survivor, but my situation was different. I look at Hamlin's situation. I just felt I didn't feel well, whatever. I don't want to talk about myself, but I just got myself up one morning. I didn't feel right. It was going on I went to the doctor. I went to my heart specialist, who's a very dear friend of mine, and he put me on the stress on the what do you call it, the treadmill.
Yeah, treadmill.
And he did the stress test. And 1 minute into it, I felt like I was going to faint. And so he says to me, you're going straight to the hospital. And next day I was under the knife. Here's the thing, though. Here's what I don't understand. You have a young man who's 24 years old. He's at the prime of his career. He's an athlete. He's trained for this. I had symptoms. I felt certain things. And I later found out that I had a 90% blockage of all my arteries. 90%.
Yeah.
The surgeon said to me, he says, you should have been dead 3 months ago. Now, how can that happen to someone to someone like me in that situation? And then you have a guy like Hamlin, who from what I understand, showed no symptoms whatsoever. He had no history of that, didn't feel anything. And all of a sudden he gets tackled, something which he's probably been tackled hundreds of times throughout his young career. And then all of a sudden he's in that situation. He goes into cardiac arrest. How do you differentiate one from the other?
They're two totally separate situations. So yours is more of a chronic condition, and basically you had that buildup happening over time. And also you're a lot older than he is. As we get older and we have blockages, your body starts to try and build other routes. They're called accessory pathways. So it'll actually start building other blood vessels around the blockages. So it's more likely, like let's say you ended up having an actual cardiac event other than just what happened to you in the stress test. You have a higher chance of surviving it with less heart damage than somebody that's younger. But this is an issue, because you have those pathways that he wouldn't have. But his issue is, presuming the diagnosis that we're going to talk about in a bit, it was an electrical problem. So can you imagine if you have, this is a blood pump is what your heart is, but let's say you had a water pump, right? And it's all controlled by a computer, and you start flicking that computer and you throw off those wires, it's not going to be able to pump effectively. That's in essence what happened to him. So we have the atrium at the top, the ventricles at the bottom, and the ventricles, the left ventricle is really the workhorse of the heart. And if those ventricles are not able to coordinate when they're pumping so that the entire ventricle pumps at the same time, you're not going to be able to produce blood pressure or cardiac output. So your case is a blockage of the blood that actually feeds the muscle of the heart as opposed to what pumps out to the body. Where his problem is the electrical system of the heart itself not allowing it to pump at all.
You see, as a layperson, I look at this and I look at this young man and I'm saying, were there any signs that this could possibly happen to him?
No.
It doesn't even make sense.
If it was truly, and go ahead, the research that's been done on commotio cordis is what the popular opinion is what happened to him, mainly in baseball players, sometimes in hockey players, like the hockey player that got hit the Blues. It is a very, very extremely rare situation, and Jason can talk more about it, about like statistics and stuff on it. So, now that we've, talked about, a general type of heart attack that you had that could have led, if you would have had a blockage, you could have very well led to a cardiac arrest, because when you have a blockage from the blood feeding the heart, now your heart dies. And when the heart muscle dies, then it can't pump. And then what Jason was talking about when it comes to Hamlin is his electrical, his electrical beat was interrupted. And the commotio cordis, which is the popular diagnosis at this point in time, it's not been completely stamped 100%, but it's a very popular opinion at this point about what happened to him. And Jason can explain a lot more about it.
Could you do that, Jason? Explain a little bit about that.
So basically what commotio cordis is, so for your electrical cycle in your heart, there's a big waveform. It's called the PQRST, right? When your P wave, which is the first inflection on an EKG, right? That is when your atrium is firing. So that's atrial depolarization. Then you have a wide waveform, which is your QRS. That is when your ventricles are firing. So if you think of, we could probably put it up a nice EKG rhythm.
Picture of the, yep, there it is.
Yeah, so you see a little one, that's your P wave. Then you see a big wide one, which is your QRS, that's your ventricles firing. And then afterwards, you'll see it go straight again, and then you'll see a T wave, which is ventricular repolarization. So what they found with animal studies is that during that T wave, where the ventricles are getting ready to fire again, that's their resting time for the ventricles. If a significant impact happens before the peak of that T wave, so right around the midpoint when it starts to rise before it gets to the very top, basically it throws off the electrical conduction of the heart. And if you consider this, so it's getting ready to fire, it's in its resting phase, and then it takes a serious impact. There's something called cardiac cell automaticity. So imagine there's millions of cells there. The nerves can't reach all of them. So the ones that they reach, that the signal actually gets to initially are going to fire first. And then it's almost like if you tap your buddy next to you, hey, it's your turn, and then he taps the next guy, and it's his turn and his turn. That's what cardiac automaticity is. So in the middle of this resting phase, now you have this huge impact, and the cells do what they're trained to do. They tell their buddy, they fire, and they tell their buddy to fire, and then they tell the next buddy to fire. But then as they're starting to fire, then the SA node initiates, it gets to the AV node, and then they tell the nerves are telling the cells to fire. So, but some of them already started firing. So you end up in ventricular fibrillation, which is basically where it's not a coordinated firing of the cells, and you get no cardiac output. Yeah,
So it's like a bunch of people doing this stuff at the same time. Everybody's doing their own thing. They're not coordinated.
The easiest way, when the heart goes into ventricular fibrillation, it quivers. A heart's supposed to pump like, heart's supposed to put blood up. It's supposed to, beat, right? Well, what happens when you go into VFib, it kind of wiggles. It's kind of just like this, like it doesn't have any, it just kind of shakes, it kind of shimmies. It doesn't actually contract and do all that stuff that he just described. It just kind of wiggles. And then we see that on a monitor. And when we see it on a monitor, it's one of the only shockable rhythms that can get, and we shock it with electricity. Again, funny enough, that it's the electrical conduction that got shocked when he got hit in the chest. And then the way we get back when the heart is wiggly like that is we shock it again with electricity through a defibrillator or an AED, as some people have heard it, or in the lay terms. But we use a defibrillator, which is the same thing as an AED. But we can actually see the rhythm, where an AED you can't see the rhythm. But our monitors, then most likely the monitor that he had on him would be a high level, cardiac monitor, and they could see the rhythm. And they say, hey, that's shockable. Let's go ahead and shock him. And that's why they were able to get him back right there on the field. And that's another thing to keep in mind is you don't. When popular belief is, oh my God, they have a cardiac arrest, got to get them to the hospital. That's ancient, right? We stay and play now. I mean, for lack of better terms, we stay and we work that person, because what they found is your highest chance of survivability is if you give that person compressions and shocks if they're eligible for a shock with that rhythm.
Well, but at some point you have to stop and take them to the hospital. When do you know?
Well, that when you get ROSC. So I don't think they would have done this. Like my protocol, I work a patient for 20 minutes. And if that patient is not viable after 20 minutes, I don't transport them to the hospital. We call it the coroner, and we go have a big, long, hard discussion with family. Yeah. Because what they found that it actually puts the first responder in more jeopardy, going lights and sirens with a non-viable patient, trying to make them viable. And they've got study after study after study that say that if you've worked a cardiac arrest for 20 minutes and you've got certain other parameters that you're looking at and you've never shocked this person, they were never in that shockable rhythm, then there is no viability to that patient. There's other things to look at. I'm not going to get into all the stuff we look at, but there's other things that our equipment tells us how far down and how far bad that patient's heart is and what the body is when it's not doing the right thing. So we can call it on scene. Now, in the case of Damar Hamlin, we did get ROSC, return of spontaneous circulation is what they call it. They did get ROSC on Hamlin, so they transported him. Now, I still feel that if they were 20 minutes into that arrest and they didn't have a pulse yet of his own, I still feel because of the brevity of the situation, being in the middle of a football field, they would have still loaded him up and taken him to the hospital. That's just what same thing as if you work in a cardiac arrest for the kid, you load that kid up and you take him to the hospital. You want to show everybody that you're doing everything you can, so I do feel that he still would have been taken to the hospital even if he didn't have a heartbeat come back on the field. But he luckily did. And Jason, what was I thought the one time when we talking about this originally about this show and when we first met, what was the percentage of survivability with this cordis syndrome?
Yeah, so let me give you a little more. So I'm on the National Commotio Cordis Registry. And what they did was they put together 69 well-characterized cases including 34 occurring during organized competitive athletics and 35 that occurred during informal recreational sports at home, school or playground, or during other non-sporting activities. So ages range from 1 to 38, but the mean was 12 years old. What they've found is that between 12 and around 22 is where most of the cases happen. So 70% of these were under 16 years old. The most common sports involved were youth baseball, where they had 39, softball they had 7, ice hockey they had 7. But
baseball,
with 3,
Ralph, the baseball hitting them.
Yeah, these are
Baseball
projectiles.
hitting them in the chest. Yeah, projectiles.
But then they had 3 in football and 2 in soccer. Oh, I'm sorry, 3 each in football and soccer. So I guess 6 total. So 3 football, 3 soccer, and then 2 in karate and 2 in rugby. So it's interesting because some of the sports, like karate, there's no projectile. They're not throwing ninja stars at each other.
Well, but there's
But-
feet.
but-
There's
yeah.
feet and fists.
Yeah,
you know,
I don't
I mean,
understand.
yeah.
So they said chest blows were produced in 52, so 75% by a projectile that was part of the game itself, such as baseballs or hockey pucks. The other 17 events, 25%, did not involve a projectile, but rather were the result of broad surface bodily contact with the victim's chest, such as in a collision with a teammate or a karate kick. So that's kind of what we're dealing with, right?
But still, what was the total number of the national registry of it?
So yeah, of these cases, because they only put cases in here that are well documented. So they had witnesses from the beginning to the end. But there's about 10 to 30 around the world every year of this. So not very much, because if you think about, there's so many sports and so many athletes
So many
out
sports that happening all the time. Yeah.
Yeah, but hold
But
on.
I
a second.
thought you mentioned that the survivability, the survivability
Yes.
was, what was the survivability percentage you gave of
35%.
even with CPR?
Yeah.
35%.
Is due to blunt chest, or sufficient magnitude to result in cardiac arrest, is not uniformly fatal, and about 10% survive the incident. May occur in circumstances unnoticed with sports and even lead to blah, blah, blah. So they're saying 10%. Another study that I read put it at 33 to 35% when CPR is initiated immediately on scene. So
that means that DeMar Hamlin was a 35%er.
yeah.
So there was a
And-
75% chance that he was going to die.
Yeah.
But he didn't. Even when
Exactly.
CPR starts immediately. So
Mhm.
that's huge because, we're saying that a cardiac arrest or witness cardiac arrest at home or in, not caused by a projectile, Ralph, is we can save up to 50% of people. So a 50-50 chance you're going to survive a witness cardiac arrest that's not an impact like that. Just a regular old-fashioned, if you would have kept on going for 3 more days or 4 more days, you could have had a cardiac arrest to survive you, and then a 50-50 chance when everything is in early CPR and all the EMS systems put into place properly. So to say that this commotio cordis is only a 35% survival rate with CPR initiated very quickly is a huge deal because he's a very low percentage to survive that, and he did.
Yeah, there's so many rarities here.
Right.
Is there a certain part of the body? Is this being hit in the chest area, or is there another part of the body? Do you know that could cause something like this, or does it have to be in the area of the heart?
It has to be the heart, and it has to be in that T wave. So right when the ventricles are like resting and getting ready to fire again, right at that moment. So if you think about it, an impact from the back side could potentially cause it too, but there's not any documented cases of it. But
your heart's a lot closer to the surface of your chest.
Yeah.
And, you got your spine and your lungs to protect from the back of the blow, from a blow happening to the back of a person. But when it comes to, if you think about it, if you ever had your heartbeat, like I feel like my heart's beating like you've got done raised, you can put your hand on your chest and you can feel your heartbeat right through your chest because the heart's not much deeper than the thickness of your bones on the front part of the chest. It sits on the front side of our chest. It doesn't sit behind lungs like it does if you're looking at us from the back. It's right up front.
Gentlemen, as you know, I have a law background, so mine's a legal background, and we're very cynical. This is the way I hear your explanation, and I find this Hamlin thing to be basically what I said before, an anomaly. I mean, this is I don't know how many other cardiac arrest situations there have been in football throughout the history of football. I'm sure we can research that.
There's been a few like practices on like hot days and truly like dehydrated. There's been some stuff like that, and I know that there was a big case in I think it was it not Wisconsin, but Minnesota I believe Minnesota college football had a player die on the practice field because of not getting enough liquids, and he was complaining to his coach that he felt dizzy, but they ignored him, and that was pretty.
But that didn't happen
well
here,
known.
Kyle. That didn't happen here. So
but when you just asked about football in general, still very few.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. So I look at this, and my legal mind says there has to be something more to this. There has to be something. There had to be some pre-existing condition, something wrong with this young man that wasn't working for this to happen. Because when you talk about 100 and something years of football, and this has been going on forever, and notwithstanding those exceptions that you talked about, dehydration, those are pre-existing conditions. If someone's dehydrated,
we don't know if he was dehydrated. It was early in the game, so we don't feel that he was. But he could have been dehydrated from before. Right. I don't know. See, that's stuff that we don't know.
My legal mind says there's a cat somewhere in the bag that nobody's left out yet.
Jason also too, that first night we all met together to talk about having this type of official podcast. We had a much longer conversation than a podcast. We've kind of condensed that conversation down now tonight. But one thing that Jason mentioned was that they tried to get pigs, which is anatomically, a pig is the closest thing to a human. Their heart is built about the same. Their structures are about the same resistance. They have the same resistance when it comes to shocking them if you're trying to do, defibrillation. So a pig is the closest per thing than doing tests on humans. So one thing that Jason mentioned was they tried to send pigs into commotio cordis by hitting them at the precise time that they could see on a monitor and get this timing down. And what he mentioned to me, and I don't know if you remember talking to us about that night, but it basically came about was some pigs were just more susceptible to commotio cordis, and others never could get into it, even when hit at the right exact time and the right exact that place.
For the benefit of all the viewers, define commotio cordis again, just so we can tie this in.
Basically, it's ventricular fibrillation caused by an impact during the cardiac cycle of the T wave.
Okay.
Before the T wave peaks,
which is very rare.
And you got to think, a heartbeat is very fast. I mean, like it's faster than that. I mean, like we're talking about a T wave hit the chest when the T wave is moving, and it's faster than I could snap my fingers.
It's very rare.
Yeah, and what they found in that study with the pigs was that I think it was 60% of them. 30% of them never went into commotio cordis, even though they were getting hit at the right time. Another 30% would produce what are called premature ventricular contractions, and kind of like a V-fib rhythm, but then they would snap out of it, and they would never go into true commotio cordis, where they go into V-fib and they need to be resuscitated. And then another 30% not only went into commotio cordis when they were hit, but they would go back into it more readily. So there's got to be some component underlying. And if you think of the heart as a sodium-potassium pump, in the sense that when it's firing and when it's getting ready to fire, it has either more sodium or more potassium in it, and also calcium component as well. If there's something wrong with the balance of your electrolytes, it's more likely for you to create these different electrical rhythms. And so it's possible that there could be an electrolyte component to this. I was trying to find a study that kind of, correlated that, but they talked about it, but they never actually, checked the pig's electrolytes before.
Doesn't happen enough. It doesn't. Yeah. I mean, it doesn't. It's so rare. It doesn't hit the radar to be. The fact that they've done a study on pigs blows me away because it is such a rare abnormality.
Yeah, it was pretty recent too. Let me see.
Yeah. I mean, it's such a
2022.
rare,
Oh, that's
it's
the
such a
update.
rare abnormality that it shocks me that there was even a pig study. But like
Yeah.
you just said, it only happened a year ago. That study never been.
Listen,
studied
gentlemen,
before.
we're going to have to leave it here, but we're going to follow. We're going to make this into a series because there's just so much information, and I've got so many questions. My head's about to explode with all the questions that I have because I'm trying to and I'm sure that people are listening to this. They try to wrap their heads around this, and not only that, from an educational standpoint, at some point, we would want you, gentlemen, because Kyle, I know that you actually give CPR classes. I'm sure Jason,
Yeah.
you have too.
Yeah.
Yep. I'm actually
you know,
actively giving one. I'm giving 3 next week. So
Okay,
I
so
did over 35 CPR classes. It was weird, this timing of all this, because
yeah.
I had given 35 classes in the month of December and early January, and this
Yeah.
game happened. And then now CPR is being discussed like openly on TV, and go learn how to do CPR, and people talking about it. And I would, and I know Jason would definitely, resonate this same exact thing. If you have never had anybody teach you CPR, please, please, please look into going to find a class. And if you can't find a class, I'm going to put up a video here at the end of this episode. That's going to be a very simple 47-second video that shows you exactly how to start CPR. And all that we care about as caregivers, Jason and I will attest to this, that we just care that you're pushing on the chest before we get there, because that's the highest chance of survivability. Even if you don't know how to do it correctly, as long as you have watched a video and you think you can find the center of their chest and press down hard enough, you think that you're pushing down about 2 inches and then coming back up and doing it over and over again fast, about 100 beats a minute. Some people don't know what that is. Just sing the song Staying Alive in your head and come down on that beat of that's about 100 beats a minute. Okay.
The Bee Gees.
So if you
now you're promoting the Bee Gees.
I mean,
is that what you're doing?
like right now, yeah, exactly.
I love that song.
So if even this is now this is not a CPR class. I have to have a disclaimer here. This is not a CPR class. But if all you know is what I just said, you're still going to be better off doing what I just talked about, or watching this video and doing what they explained, than just standing back and saying, I don't want to touch them. You are protected under Good Samaritan laws if it's a stranger. Yeah. If it's your loved one, for the love of all that is holy, push on their chest. If you don't,
well, let me put a disclaimer to what you just said, because the Good Samaritan laws, I'm not sure, but every state has their own laws.
Okay.
And these Good Samaritan laws,
as long as it's not, as far as I know, the way that I understand it, and all the things I've ever done when I'm, because being a paramedic and knowing what to do, that's a whole nother bag of worms. When I'm not on the medic, and I'm just average Joe Blow on the street and I cross the cardiac arrest. Okay, wait a second. Legally, wait a second. If I do the wrong thing, could I get in trouble? Well, I'm protected as well under the duty to act law in my state, right?
But your standard
so
is
I've got a duty
higher,
to act. I can't just not do it. Come to find out, I have done bystander CPR before EMS has gotten there. I've been on car accidents that I've witnessed, and somebody didn't have a pulse, and I've started CPR in the car because I couldn't get them out; they were too big. So by myself. So I mean, I've done that stuff, unfortunately in my life, that's above and beyond when I'm on duty.
Yeah.
But it's one of those things where, as long as you, and we're trying to make it more simple. The medical world is trying to make it more simple and less scary for people to start CPR if they witness somebody going into what they feel is a cardiac arrest, which means unconscious, unresponsive. You can start CPR per the guidelines of what we all learn about, called the AHA, American Heart Association. Unconscious, unresponsive, no pulse, start CPR.
Well, I don't think they're doing a good enough job, Kyle.
Part of it is people don't want to know. People are like, well, I'll never be put in that situation. Part of it is, wait a second, mouth to mouth. I don't want to know mouth. It used to be called mouth to mouth.
Yeah.
It was going to be called mouth to mouth. It was called when I was growing up, it was called mouth to mouth. It wasn't called hands only CPR. Okay. Right. It was called mouth to mouth. Nobody wants to put their mouth on people, especially not after a damn pandemic.
Well, that depends.
Nobody wants to put their mouth on anybody, let alone, I barely put, one of those things. It's like, we're no longer asking you to breathe for them, because what we found out in all these studies that we did, and all these studies that were huge, 24,000 CPR patients by the medical field in the EMS world. We found that just compressing at a rate of 100 and deep, when you release, you bring a little bit of air on that recoil. When that chest comes back up, you suck in just enough air for that patient to be viable until EMS can get there and do more advanced.
All right, we're going to
things.
talk about that in more detail in the next episode, where you can really, and we'll, I know you were going to show at the end of this, we're going to show a short video, that 47-second video, but perhaps on the
and
next
the website
episode,
that'll be in the link.
and the web, but we'll get more into that. There's so many areas of this subject. What is that?
Somebody's
noise?
Jason.
Wow.
That must be Jason's. Somebody have a race car going by your house?
Oh yeah, that just happened. It's like a motorcycle or something.
Yeah, I don't.
Jason,
I'm
before we
I'm in a
get going,
neighborhood.
Jason, any closing comments, and then we'll go to Kyle so he can basically give us an idea of what we're going to lead into in the next episode. So you have any closing comments on this, Jason?
Just in closing, I guess kind of in preparation for the next video, we'll probably talk about a couple of other things that could have led to this occurring that make it more likely for commotio cordis in a young, healthy athlete. But yeah, the rarities, not only is commotio cordis so rare, but his age, he's beyond the average age. The fact that it was non-projectile, it just is so rare. And the fact that luckily he was resuscitated and he's perfectly fine now. He's back home, right? The whole thing is rare. And there's, like you said earlier, there's gotta be something underlying. So we'll get a little more into that in the next episode.
I appreciate that.
Yep.
All right, so Kyle, he's basically led into that. What are we going to do?
The next episode, you know, one of the things that another thing I want to bring up about that night is when we were all watching this in real time, it was very quick for these national broadcasts that were covering it, including ESPN, Fox News, Fox Sports, I should say, the NFL Network. We had something that we have not seen for a long time, other than ridicule. We had open prayer on TV. People praying for this man to survive. And we've had people be really critical about, well, prayer didn't save them. The medical team saved them. And we have some pretty strong opinions about that, or at least I do, because all I know is I only know how to do what I do because somebody up above allows me to do it. And I'll share something with you that I haven't really shared with much people. I did share it with these two gentlemen when we prepped for this podcast, but I'll share with you my belief when it comes to the medical field and faith, and they are intertwined.
Okay, but save that as a teaser for the next one. We're gonna bring the legal aspect into this at some point. We're gonna bring the faith aspect of this, because that's where I'm really gonna start ranting on this. The faith
and then
aspect.
some of the controversial things that could possibly led to this.
Yeah, there's a lot of
including the big controversy,
the jibby jab.
Oh, the jib jab,
the
jab, yeah,
the jibby
The
jab.
Fauci ouchie.
Only a week before he had this incident.
I know,
but,
I know.
and I have no idea where I stand on that.
That's okay. Just sit back and listen to Jason and I. We got a real good idea where we stand on that.
I am not saying that, we have not, trust me when I tell you, the studies aren't done from all that stuff yet.
You're right.
Unfortunately, we're the biggest study known to man when it comes to this right now.
Literally.
In real time.
Yeah. Hey, thanks for tuning in, folks. We're going to pick this up next time. Share this with people. This is so important. You share this with people because this could save someone's life. Yep. You know, the New York Minute, a split second, that could happen to you or your loved one, like I said in my opening remarks, at any second. And I myself, I wouldn't know what to do. Now I do. And I have an idea. And I'm going to learn from these two gentlemen, and I hope you do, as to if you find yourself in that situation, what would you do?
Yep.
Okay, because you don't get no mulligans on this one.
Right.
That happens. There's no mulligans, like they say in golf. You get one shot at this thing. Okay, so gentlemen, I appreciate it.
All right, guys.
The time.
Thanks so
We'll
much.
Pick it up next time.
Helping to save a life is easier than you might think. Just start hands-only CPR. The first step is to send someone to call 911 or call 911 yourself. Then get directly over the victim. Put the heel of one hand in the center of the chest, then put your other hand on top of the first. Then push hard and fast in the center of the chest until help arrives. It's important to push, giving 100 to 120 compressions per minute, which is about the same tempo as the song Stayin' Alive. Let's hope you never have to use hands-only CPR. But if you see a teen or adult suddenly collapse, don't be afraid to try it. Remember, call 911, then push hard and fast in the center of the chest until help arrives. Your actions can help save a life.
You have just come face to face with the truth. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, share, and hit that bell so you will be notified when we drop new episodes.